Tonight we're kicking off a series of lectures that lead into films that were contextualized during the blacklisting process in Washington, D.C. and across the country. This series is part of the B-Word Project. We have flyers in the lobby for you so that you can see all the different things that are going on with the B-Word Project. The B-Word Project was made possible by a large grant from the Doris Duke Foundation. And we were one of the very few campuses across America to receive the grants. And so that's what most of this is about. One of the things that I wanted to call special attention to was Juan Williams' presentation at the Carpenter Center. There are flyers available on this also. That will be Thursday, October 20th. I will be one of the panelists who will question Juan Williams. You'll remember he was removed from one network, NPR, and moved over to the Fair and Balanced one. And that will be at 7:30 on October 20th, and there are many other activities that are taking place. This is the first in our series. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about censorship in America, how it happened, what was the context for this censorship, and then look at one of the blacklisted writers who produced a wonderful screenplay at the behest of Kirk Douglas. And that screenplay became the movie Spartacus. And that is going to be our first film tonight. 2 weeks from tonight, our next film will be High Noon, which is a little shorter. High Noon is 85 minutes in actual runtime for the film and actually 85 minutes of action that takes place in a very short time in the wonderful town of Hadleyville out in the West. The third film that we're going to look at is The Little Foxes, a Bette Davis film created out of the play by Lillian Hellman, who was an avowed Stalinist. So that'll be a lot of fun. It's a terrific performance by Bette Davis, who can be really mean when she wants to be. And then in our fourth film, she plays somebody who's very sympathetic. She's a librarian under pressure from the McCarthyists, so we're going to look at that. And then the fifth film is your dessert. It's The Front with Woody Allen. And I was very lucky. I was able to meet with Woody Allen in Rome this summer where I was teaching, where he's making yet another film, which will be a lot of fun. So let me contextualize what happened in America that caused the blacklisting. The House Un-American Activities Committee, known as HUAC affectionately, evolved from the Fish Committee of 1930 and its successor, the McCormick-Dickstein Committee of 1934 and 35. HUAC was created in 1938 by Congressman Martin Dies, who began attacking Stalin from the pulpit of HUAC until Stalin became our ally at the end of 1941. HUAC was made permanent in 1946. It made headlines in 1947 when Eugene Dennis, the secretary of the American Communist Party, refused to testify before it and was held in contempt. Now, the official start of the Cold War for many people, including myself, was 1946, when the Soviet Union refused to pull out of several countries they had occupied at the end of World War II. This behavior was unforgivable, and many people were upset about it. President Truman invited Winston Churchill to speak at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. And Winston Churchill gave the speech that kicked off the Cold War when he said an iron curtain had descended from the Baltic to the Adriatic. And from that point on, our relationship with the Soviet Union continued to deteriorate. In 1947, then, the HUAC made headlines when Eugene Dennis, the secretary of the American Communist Party, refused to testify before it and was held in contempt. He would eventually lose a Supreme Court case, the famous case of Dennis versus the United States, when the court held that advocating the overthrow of the government was not protected by the First Amendment. That case was not reversed until 1957. At the same time, President Truman initiated a loyalty oath for many federal employees. And the loyalty oath that Truman put in effect was then imitated by the states. For example, in 1949, believe it or not, 31 professors, many with tenure, at the University of California were fired for refusing to take the loyalty oath in the state of California. All of these events provide a context for the content of this course, an examination of some of the artists that were blacklisted during the 40s, the 50s, and even the 60s. There were people who came before HUAC who gave names and talked about their membership in the Communist Party. Elia Kazan and Bud Schulberg being the most famous of those. At the same time, Ronald Reagan, remember him, was the head of the Screen Actors Guild for most of this period, and he tried to walk a fine line between outing Soviet agents in the various unions in Hollywood who were trying to subvert them, and protecting innocent artists, like a young, innocent actress named Nancy Davis, who was falsely accused of being a member of the Communist Party. During that negotiation, they fell in love, and the rest is history. 1950 was another year in which matters went from bad to worse in the Cold War. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were apprehended for spying for the Soviet Union, turning over to its agents information about the Manhattan Project, which produced the atom bomb. The United States led a United Nations police force into Korea to stop aggression on the part of North Korea. When that happened, 2,000 communist demonstrators fought with police in New York City to protest our entering the war. Signed by President Truman, the Taft-Hartley Act required union officials to pledge that they were not communists. It was at this juncture that the junior senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy, gave a speech in Wheeling, West Virginia, claiming he had the names of over 200 communist subversives in the State Department. He waved the list at the crowd, which was composed of the Republican Women's Club of Wheeling, West Virginia. It turned out the list was his laundry tag from his hotel room. Wherever McCarthy appeared, the list and the number of people on it kept changing, which is mocked in the movie The Manchurian Candidate when the guy looks at the ketchup bottle, sees the number 57, and says, yes, 57 communists were. Tonight, we begin by examining the blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo, who had been jailed in 1950 for contempt of Congress. Trumbo was born in Colorado in 1905. He got his writing start at Vogue magazine. In 1935, he published his first novel, Eclipse, and that was about his roots in Colorado. In 1937, he came to Hollywood and soon succeeded as a screenwriter, but not before his famous 1939 novel, Johnny Got His Gun, won the National Book Award. In 1940, he was nominated for an Academy Award for his script for Kitty Foyle, starring Ginger Rogers. Oh, we got a smart group, thank God. In 1944, he wrote 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. You ought to be a professor today and ask a question like that in the classroom. I mean, my students can't remember Paul Newman. Trumbo was sympathetic to the Communist Party as early as 1935 because of the Depression, and became a member of the party in 1943 when it was safe to do so because we were allies of the Soviet Union. But soon after the war ended, the Soviets initiated an aggressive policy of acquisition, which led to a breach with the United States and our allies. The Hollywood 10 had originally been the unfriendly 19. Hollywood filmmakers, largely writers, but including some directors and actors, called before the House Un-American Activities Committee in the fall of 1947. The committee declared its intent had been to root out communist infiltration and influences in the film industry. Screenwriters were the prime target. They wrote the words and crafted the stories that Hollywood studios disseminated to America's moviegoers. They were organizers for guilds and unions and threatened the film industry's power structure. They offered entree to Hollywood's glitterati, and they were, in many cases, communists or communist sympathizers. Unable to point to any evident propaganda in the writers' films, the committee focused instead on Communist Party and guild membership. Of the 19 unfriendly witnesses called to testify about their profession and political affiliations, 10 resisted, citing their First Amendment right to free speech. That is, the right to answer the committee's questions as they saw fit or not at all. They argued that free speech also means the freedom not to speak. All 10, including Dalton Trumbo, were charged with contempt, fined, incarcerated, and except for the one who recanted his testimony immediately after his release from prison, all were blacklisted by the industry and saw their careers damaged, sometimes beyond repair. The Hollywood 10 testified before HUAC in the fall of 1947 and had considerable faith that their First Amendment rights, with its defense of free speech, thought, and assembly, and the right to private, secret assembly, would protect them. Of the 10, John Howard Lawson was an intense and intensely political character. Although his writing credits were not significant, Lawson left a larger imprint as a formidable organizer for the Screenwriters Guild, for an array of liberal causes, and for the Communist Party. The rising tide of minority and women's movements in the summer of 1977, when Lawson died, underscored both the value and the peril of progressive organizing. Jack was a dangerous man, said one of his followers. He was also controversial, even among his colleagues, considered by some to be stern and doctrinaire, remaining stubbornly aligned with the Soviet Union and the Communist Party long after most of us had tempered our allegiances. Remembered for both his fierce integrity and his kindness, Albert Maltz, one of the 10, occupied a middle position. Maltz was a man always in search of the truth. He was a socialist, but human concerns, not materialist dogma, was at the heart of his thought and his practice. The investigation that led to the jailing of the Hollywood 10 in May of 1947 was a series of hearings at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles. Although the sessions were closed, HUAC Chairman J. Parnell Thomas provided the media with summaries of each day's testimony from actors, producers, and other industry insiders, underscoring the threat of communist influence and the menace to free America. His committee, Thomas said, had been amazed at the revelations made by witnesses and in their frankness, in their ability to name names, places, dates, communist card numbers, and so forth. Thomas claimed 90% of communist infiltration was in the screenwriting field. That's why it was targeted. Based on this testimony, HUAC assembled a list of 41 witnesses to subpoena for hearings in Washington, D.C. in October of 1947. Some were friendly witnesses who were expected to cooperate and name names. Others were unfriendly witnesses who openly opposed the committee's intrusion. The dissenting group was soon labeled the Unfriendly 19. When the subpoenas arrived in 1947, it was clear they were headed for trouble. The 19 men, 4 lawyers, and a secretary met the evening before they were to testify to discuss their strategy. Attorney Robert Kenney's suggestion that the group refuse to answer any and all questions based on the First Amendment right to free speech was seconded by other lawyers. Free speech included, they insisted, the right to speak or not to speak at all. There would be no way to win once they started talking. According to HUAC's rules, answering any one question mandated answering all other questions or being charged with contempt. And if testimony was later contradicted by friendly witnesses, perjury charges were certainly going to be leveled. A Fifth Amendment defense, claiming the right not to incriminate yourself under the Bill of Rights, was considered and rejected since it would be interpreted as concealment of a crime, and no one there believed he had committed one. By the end of the evening, the approach was modified. Quote, "I want you not to refuse to answer a question, but to say you're going to answer in your own way," urged the group's attorney. It was agreed each would reply in his own way, and each would prepare a written statement to offer the committee. "We'll make a good fight and win," said Herbert Biberman. Of the 19 unfriendly witnesses subpoenaed to Washington, 11 were called to testify in the Old House caucus room before Chairman Thomas, the chief investigator Richard Sterling, and a new member to the committee, Representative Richard Nixon from Whittier, California.